when Donald Trump interrupted Barack Obama repeatedly, it became more than just a clash of voices. It revealed a deeper contrast in how both men approached conflict. Trump has always relied on force, volume, and timing to dominate a conversation. He interrupts not just to argue, but to throw an opponent off balance, to take control of the moment before it fully develops. In that room, he believed his interruptions were a weapon that could shake Obama's composure and weaken his authority. Each time Trump leaned forward and cut in with a remark, it seemed like he was testing how far he could push before Obama cracked. Yet what unfolded was something unexpected. Obama didn't meet interruption with interruption. He didn't escalate. Instead, he absorbed the pressure, continued his point, and waited. Composure. In politics or in life, is not simply about staying calm. It's about showing others that you cannot be pulled down into chaos no matter how many times someone tries. This is what Obama embodied in that moment. He listened, paused, sometimes gave a slight smile, and kept on with his words. He didn't let the 6 interruptions redefine the direction of his message. The audience noticed this. They were not just hearing Obama's words. They were watching a test of endurance play out in real time. Every interruption by Trump created a new moment of tension, but every composed response by Obama diffused it without needing to escalate into a shouting match. That contrast grew sharper with each exchange, and by the time Trump had interrupted for the 6th time, the difference in their styles was undeniable. Composure becomes powerful when it exposes the weakness of noise. Trump believed volume would carry weight, but the more he jumped in, the more it highlighted the fact that he had no patience for a full argument to unfold. Obama's restraint, on the other hand, reminded people that patience and clarity have their own authority. Instead of losing his focus, he showed that his presence in the room was not fragile. In fact, the interruptions only magnified his calmness. The less he reacted, the more obvious it became that Trump was struggling to maintain control. By not meeting fire with fire, Obama made Trump's interruptions look more desperate than dominant. The 7th moment sealed the lesson. When Obama finally responded with that single line, "Donald, interruptions don't make your points stronger, they just make your arguments weaker," it wasn't only a retort, it was the release of everything he had been holding back. He hadn't rushed to shut Trump down earlier because composure isn't about winning every small moment. It's about letting the pattern reveal itself until one response can expose it completely. And in that one sentence, Obama didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to lecture or insult. His composure allowed him to pick the exact moment, to deliver a point that ended the interruptions without further conflict. What shocked the room wasn't the sentence alone, but the fact that it had been built brick by brick, through restraint. If Obama had snapped at the 2nd or 3rd interruption, it might have turned into a shouting match, and the weight of his words would have been lost. But by keeping calm, he created space for the interruptions to pile up, making Trump's behavior more visible with each repetition. When the final line came, it was not only logical but undeniable. The silence that followed was the audience recognizing the strength of composure in action. Trump's approach showed how chaos can command attention but fail to sustain credibility. Obama's approach showed that composure can look passive at first, but when it reveals itself fully, it holds more power than constant disruption. In politics, debates, and even everyday life, people often confuse noise for strength. What this moment proved was that composure is not weakness, it is strategy. By staying calm, Obama allowed Trump to unravel his own authority, interruption by interruption, until the room was ready to accept the shutdown without resistance. That day, the lesson became clear. Composure doesn't just survive chaos, it defeats it. Trump believed 6 interruptions gave him control, but it was Obama's refusal to be shaken that turned the 7th moment into a shutdown that no one in the room could ignore. Silence often carries a weight that words cannot, and in the tense exchange between Donald Trump and Barack Obama, it was silence that ultimately reshaped the room. Trump's interruptions came one after another, loud and deliberate, designed to seize attention and derail Obama's message. He believed that by constantly cutting in, he could dominate the moment and keep Obama from building momentum. For 6 interruptions, the room was filled with noise. Trump's voice, pushing, challenging, and pressing into every pause. Yet what lingered after Obama's 7th response wasn't more noise. It was silence. And that silence spoke louder than anything else. The audience had been tracking the rhythm of the back and forth. Each time Trump jumped in, some people tensed, waiting to see if Obama would finally push back. But Obama didn't escalate. He let Trump's interruptions stack, patiently continuing his point. By the 6th one, the energy in the room had shifted. People weren't only hearing Trump anymore. They were beginning to feel the repetition, the sharpness of it, and the lack of substance in it. Obama's composure made each interruption more noticeable, and the contrast set the stage for what would follow. When Obama finally delivered the line, "Donald, interruptions don't make your points stronger, they just make your arguments weaker," the reaction was not loud applause or instant cheering. Instead, the room fell into silence. And that silence mattered because it was collective recognition. It was the moment when people understood the weight of what had just been said. No one needed to add commentary. No one needed to repeat or explain it. The silence itself confirmed that the line had landed with finality. Trump, who thrived on constant engagement and quick exchanges, suddenly had no space to move. His strategy depended on keeping the noise going, keeping the tempo high so that his interruptions could overwhelm the structure of the conversation, but silence cut off that oxygen. Obama didn't just shut him down with words. He froze the rhythm entirely, leaving Trump with nothing to interrupt. The absence of noise was more unsettling for him than any counterattack could have been. This is where silence shows its true power. In a heated debate or confrontation, people expect noise, arguments clashing, voices rising, energy feeding off energy. But silence is unexpected. It forces everyone in the room to sit with the words that have been spoken. And in this case, the silence carried the weight of truth. Obama didn't have to repeat his line or drive it further. The silence stretched it out, echoing without sound, making it impossible to ignore. For Trump, who had spent years shaping his public presence around dominance through speech, the silence exposed something he couldn't control. He could interrupt words, but he couldn't interrupt silence. He could dismiss arguments, but he couldn't dismiss the stillness of a room that had turned against the chaos. That pause was a mirror, reflecting back the futility of his tactic. And while silence may seem passive, in that moment, it was more commanding than anything else said on stage. Obama had used silence before as part of his style, pausing in speeches, letting his words hang so people could absorb them. But here, it wasn't just his silence. It was the collective silence of an audience that realized the interruptions had run their course. That shared quiet gave his sentence even more gravity. It wasn't a clash of voices anymore. It was a moment where one voice stood tall and the other was absorbed into stillness. The power of silence in this exchange showed that sometimes the most impactful responses are not the ones delivered with passion or volume, but the ones that allow space for truth to settle. Obama didn't need to outshout Trump or match his interruptions. He simply had to wait until the interruptions collapsed under their own weight, and then let silence do the rest. The room's reaction proved that silence, when timed correctly, can amplify a point more than applause ever could. Trump interrupted 6 times. But after Obama's 7th response, the silence that followed was louder than any of those interruptions. It carried finality, it carried authority, and it carried a kind of shock that left Trump with nothing to add. The power of silence had spoken for Obama, and it had spoken louder than Trump's interruptions ever did. Respect is often revealed not in words but in behavior, and the exchange between Donald Trump and Barack Obama showed how interruptions can strip away the appearance of respect, while composure can reinforce it. Each time Trump cut in, the act itself carried a message that the person speaking was not worthy of finishing a thought, that his words could be dismissed or overridden. For Trump, this style had always been part of his approach: seize control, dominate the moment, and show no hesitation in breaking into another's space. But the effect in this setting was different. With every interruption, the perception of disrespect became more visible, not only to Obama, but to everyone watching. Obama, by contrast, treated the situation differently. He didn't respond by cutting Trump off in return, or by raising his voice to battle for airtime. Instead, he allowed Trump's behavior to highlight itself. By remaining calm, he made the interruptions seem out of place, almost jarring. His choice not to engage in the same manner communicated respect, not just for Trump as an opponent, but for the audience and the setting itself. Obama's patience suggested that he valued the discussion enough not to let it devolve into a shouting match. That restraint built a stark contrast. One man fighting for dominance through disruption, the other protecting the conversation through composure. Respect in leadership is not only about what is said, but about the space one allows for others. Trump's repeated interruptions eroded the space for dialogue. Instead of strengthening his case, they exposed an unwillingness to let opposing ideas be fully heard. For those observing, this lack of respect undermined the authority he was trying to project. Authority gained through force tends to feel temporary and brittle, while authority built on patience and acknowledgement feels lasting. Obama demonstrated that respect can coexist with disagreement. He didn't have to approve of Trump's actions, but by refusing to mirror them, he showed he wouldn't reduce himself to the same tactics. By the time the 6th interruption came, many in the room were no longer reacting to Trump's words, but to the manner in which they were delivered. The interruptions had lost their sharpness and were beginning to sound repetitive, even exhausting. People noticed not the strength of Trump's position, but the absence of courtesy. This is the risk of disregarding respect once people stop listening to what you're saying and start focusing on how you're saying it. The content loses power. Obama understood this dynamic, and he leaned into it by continuing to speak as though the interruptions did not shake him. The turning point was the 7th response. When Obama said, "Donald, interruptions don't make your points stronger, they just make your arguments weaker." It wasn't only a critique of strategy, it was also a statement about respect. Interrupting repeatedly was not a display of strength. It was a display of disregard. Obama's calm response flipped that dynamic on its head. Instead of looking like the one under attack, he looked like the one setting the standard for how discourse should happen. His words reminded everyone that real strength lies in respecting the process of dialogue, not in bulldozing it. Asterisk for Trump, who built much of his persona around taking control of conversations. The response created an unexpected moment. He was suddenly framed not as the strong figure pressing his case, but as the one unwilling to give basic respect in discussion. The audience could feel the difference. Some might have come expecting a clash of equals, but what they witnessed was one man unraveling his own credibility, while the other preserved his in politics. Perception is everything, and in that moment, the perception was clear. Trump's interruptions were undermining him, while Obama's composure was elevating him. Respect doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like letting another person finish their sentence, waiting your turn, or listening long enough to understand before responding. Obama modeled that in the midst of repeated disruption, and the effect was striking. Trump revealed, "What happens when respect is absent? Chaos overshadows content, and the audience begins to pull back." Obama revealed what happens when respect is present. People lean in, trusting the speaker to value both them and the conversation. What made the seventh moment so effective was that respect had been visibly lacking on one side and carefully maintained on the other. When Obama finally spoke his line, it landed with authority, not just because of the words themselves, but because of the respect he had preserved throughout the exchange. He had shown that you don't need to shout to earn authority, and you don't need to interrupt to assert strength. Sometimes, the deepest respect you can give is to let someone expose themselves through their own behavior while you remain steady. In that room, it was Trump who lost respect through interruption, and it was Obama who gained it by showing he didn't need to interrupt at all. Sometimes it only takes one line to shift an entire atmosphere, and that was what Barack Obama demonstrated when Donald Trump interrupted him again and again. For 6 interruptions, Trump had been the loudest voice in the room, determined to take over the flow of the conversation. His tactic was simple: speak over, cut in, and dominate through persistence. He wasn't trying to wait his turn. He was trying to make sure Obama's words never landed with their full weight. Many expected Obama to eventually match Trump's energy, to fight back in the same style. But instead, he waited, endured, and let the pattern play out until it revealed itself fully. That waiting created the perfect opening for a single line to end the cycle. When Obama finally turned to Trump and said, "Donald, interruptions don't make your points stronger, they just make your arguments weaker," the effect was immediate. It wasn't a long speech, nor was it delivered with anger. It was short, calm, and precise. And yet, it shifted the entire energy of the exchange in a way that none of Trump's interruptions could. One sentence carried more weight than 6 loud interjections. The reason this worked so effectively is because one line, when timed correctly, can represent all the unspoken observations that have been building in the minds of listeners. By the time Obama delivered it, the audience had already noticed the interruptions stacking up. They had felt the impatience of Trump's behavior and the restraint of Obama's composure. The 7th line gave voice to what they were already sensing, and that's why it struck so deeply. Obama didn't have to lecture or explain. He only had to say what was already visible. In doing so, he turned the frustration of the room into agreement with him. Trump's strength has always been in creating disruption. He thrives on moments where chaos is mistaken for control, and where sheer volume makes it seem as though he's winning. But disruption is fragile. It collapses when confronted with clarity. That's why the single line mattered more than any counter-interruption could have. If Obama had chosen to fight interruption with interruption, it would have turned into a clash of noise, with neither side rising above the other. Instead, by waiting for the right moment, he used one sentence to cut through all the noise at once. What shocked people was not only the line itself, but the fact that it ended the interruptions entirely. For once, Trump didn't have a comeback. He paused, and in that pause, the room realized that the game had changed. The man who had dominated through 6 interjections suddenly looked exposed, while the man who had held back now looked commanding. It was a reminder that strength in conversation doesn't always come from how much you say, often comes from how well you choose when and how to speak. The silence that followed amplified the moment even more. No one needed to add anything. Obama didn't need to push further or expand. The one line was enough. It stood alone, carried by the fact that it was perfectly placed. This is what makes a single sentence so powerful in certain contexts. It doesn't just end one moment. It redefines everything that came before it. The interruptions no longer looked like dominance. They looked like a build-up to a lesson. The patience no longer looked like passivity. It looked like a strategy. For Trump, the effect was stark. His tactic had been to control through constant noise, but one line dismantled that entire approach. The interruptions lost their force once. They were named for what they were: weakness disguised as strength. Obama's words reframed the entire exchange, leaving Trump in the position of having to recover from being exposed. And because the line was short and undeniable, there was no easy way to twist it or deflect it. Asterisk. This is why one well-timed line can change the room. It crystallizes what everyone has been witnessing but hasn't yet articulated. It carries authority not because of its length but because of the weight of the moment it captures. Obama showed that day that sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is also the simplest. One line spoken at the right time can do what a dozen interruptions cannot hit, can silence the room, settle the tension, and leave no space for dispute. Trump had filled the space with noise, but it was Obama's single sentence that filled it with clarity. In the end, the exchange between Donald Trump and Barack Obama became less about the words spoken and more about the dynamics of presence, respect, and timing. Trump entered the conversation, armed with his usual strategy: interrupt often, speak louder, and dominate the stage through sheer persistence. For 6 attempts, he held to that tactic, believing that constant disruption would show strength and rattle Obama into reacting. But instead of breaking Obama's rhythm, those interruptions only built up a contrast. Each one added another layer of tension. Another reminder to the audience of the difference between noise and composure. Asterisk. Obama's patience was not accidental. He understood that letting the interruptions run their course would reveal more than cutting them off immediately. By holding back, he let Trump show himself fully, without needing to intervene at every turn. This approach allowed the audience to see the imbalance for themselves. It was not Obama who made Trump appear impatient, repetitive, and dismissive. It was Trump's own behavior, stacked one interruption at a time. Obama simply chose not to give him an escape from it. Asterisk. When the 7th line finally came, it wasn't designed as a dramatic knockout. It was calm, measured, almost understated. Yet that is why it carried such weight. Donald, interruptions don't make your point stronger, they just make your arguments weaker. It was the kind of line that didn't just stop the noise. It reframed the entire exchange. What had looked like persistence from Trump was suddenly revealed as fragility. What had looked like restraint from Obama was now unmistakably strength. In one sentence, the roles reversed, and the room could feel it. Asterisk. The silence that followed was the truest measure of the moment. Trump, who thrived on instant rebuttals and back and forth, had nothing to add. The audience, who had grown used to the tension of interruptions, suddenly settled into quiet recognition. Obama didn't need to push further, because the pause itself was proof that the point had landed. The power of that silence echoed longer than any argument could have. Asterisk. What makes this exchange significant is not only what it says about the two men, but what it reveals about leadership. Real authority does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it waits, allows the noise to unfold, and then cuts through it with clarity at the right time. Respect, patience, and composure are not signs of weakness. They are tools that, when used carefully, can shut down even the loudest opposition. Trump had relied on disruption to control the moment, but disruption only lasts as long as it goes unchallenged. Once it was named for what it was, it collapsed under its own weight. Asterisk. The lesson from that encounter is lasting. One doesn't need to match interruption with interruption to win a point. One doesn't need to speak the most to be heard the loudest. Sometimes, the most powerful move is to wait, to listen, and to choose a single sentence that speaks for itself. Trump's 6 interruptions filled the room with noise, but it was Obama's one line that filled it with finality. And that finality is what